Well, our scripture reading will be taken from 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 5, as well as chapter 4, verses 1 to 5. And the title of this morning's message is Spiritual Adolescence. Spiritual Adolescence. Kind of a theme for me, since I am the resident local youth pastor. Adolescence obviously resonates with me since I spend my career working with teenagers and adolescents, these lovely young people down here. I appreciate them, and I think they appreciate me. Yeah, okay, all right, good. I need some encouragement. Here we go. So 2 Timothy chapter 3, this is a letter from the Apostle Paul to one of his young apprentices, Timothy. And this is one of the things that he writes to him. He writes two letters, actually, that we have in Scripture. This is the second of two. And he writes this to Timothy. He says, "Realize this, that in the last days, difficult times will come. For men will be lovers of self, they'll be lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents. They'll be ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control. They'll be brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such people as these." And down in chapter 4, Paul says to Timothy, "I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing and his kingdom, do this: preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with great patience and instruction. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires. And they will turn away their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. But you, be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, and fulfill your ministry." There's a lot of adjectives in that. I was just reading that through. When you read it out loud, there's a lot of adjectives that you're running through there. A lot of negative attitudes, negative adjectives. And Paul gives a pretty stern command to Timothy. It's not a wishy-washy command here. It's not a, hey, if you think about doing this, if you got some time, do this. No, it says, I solemnly charge you to do this. Serious business. This isn't wishy-washy. This is serious business. Spiritual adolescence is a term that I've just kind of created for the sake of this message. I've never heard the term spiritual adolescence before, but what I'd like to do this morning is talk about the culture of adolescence, the culture that is prevalent, especially among teenagers, and to be honest, the time period goes longer and longer and longer. That's one of the trends that I'll talk about briefly. But and we'll also talk about how the adolescent culture and adolescent attitude starts to seep into us spiritually as well, starts to seep into the church as well. And what are the dangers? What are the things we ought to be looking out for when it comes to this idea of adolescence and what the attitudes are there? Now, adolescence, the term adolescence, is a fairly new term. It's an older word, but it's only been used more commonly very recently. Adolescence is basically that time period from going from child to adult. That maturing period that it takes for a child to reach, starting usually around puberty, and then moving forward until that person becomes a responsible adult. Now, the problem is that there's no real definition. Okay, when do I know I'm a man? When do I know I've entered into complete womanhood? For guys and girls, there's not that dividing thing. We have those kind of, well, at 16, I get my license, so I can start driving. Okay. At 18, I can vote. I can vote for the government, and that's a responsible thing. That's a contributing thing to society. At 19, I can drink alcohol. Well, that's another level of responsibility for young people to take seriously too. But where's that line? Where is it like say, okay, I was a boy, now I'm a man? Well, really over the last 60 years, the term has been used more fairly commonly. Really, it hasn't been since like the 1950s that this whole teenage culture has come into play and been really prevalent in our society, especially in North America. In terms of some key marking factors where we can say that a boy becomes a man or a girl becomes a woman, there are kind of 5 sociological factors that play into, hey, now you are a man. It used to be, the first would be that you would leave your home. You'd leave home. You go out, you leave your parents' home, find your own place. The second would be you'd finish your education, or your job training. And the third would be then you'd start a career track. You'd go on, and not just random jobs here or there, but actually focused on a career and path and for life. The fourth, obviously, then would be meet a nice girl, make her your wife. Meet a nice guy, make him your husband. And the fifth, the natural outflow of that, have some kids, have some children. And those would be the 5 kind of sociological factors that really would come into play that would kind of define, okay, now we are responsible adults, now we are contributors to society rather than consumers to society. And that's really the bottom line is adolescence is that time from where we get to be consumers in society to being contributors in society, being producers in society, and not just taking, but also giving, and creating, and making, and producing. But you know what? Our culture, the world out there loves adolescents. They love adolescent people. They would love for adolescents to continue on beyond the 20s, into the 30s, and that's kind of the trend. The trend there is that people are being told and being deceived that, hey, it's okay to be consumers for as long as you want. It's okay to continue to not give to society. It's okay to not produce and to not contribute to the rest of the world, of our culture, of our families, of our church, of our schools, of whatever, of our communities. And so our culture loves this idea of adolescence because it feeds the culture, these marketers, these advertisers. They love to say, hey, here's what you need. Here's what you need to be a man. Here's what you need to be a woman. Here's what you need to grow up, to be a responsible adult. You need to drive this truck. You need to drink this drink. You need to whatever, wear these clothes, right? And that they're telling us what it means to be an adult, what it means to be beyond adolescence. However, they're not right, are they? They're lying to us. They're deceiving us. So, what I would like to talk about today is basically how dangerous that spirit of adolescence is, that spirit of not contributing to society, how dangerous that can be. And I'm not saying that teenagers are dangerous, but that idea of adolescence is a dangerous one. It's a slippery one, because it leads us the wrong way. And I'd hope to connect the dots then eventually to show how, we've all been a part of an adolescent age. If any of us have lived in the last 60 years, I think most of us would say that, okay, since the 1950s, well, a lot of us have lived during a time where we've lived through an adolescent stage. Some of us, it's been a little bit shorter. Some of us were married at 18 and got that job and started that career and never left it, had kids and home and whatever, and went on. Maybe I'd like to take a little survey, actually. If you would be so kind, if you were married, let's say before the age 21 or younger, would you please raise your hands if you were married age 21 or younger? Age 21 or younger. Okay. Now there's a few, and I don't see too many young people. Now keep your hands raised, and if you are under the age of 50, you can lower your hand now. A few hands lowered, but most of them stayed up. Thank you. You can put your hands down there. It's a different kind of shift. Back in the old days, that's what happened, right? You finished high school, you got married, and those 5 sociological factors kind of happened more quickly. You were expected to become that adult more quickly. And nowadays, that expectation's not there anymore. That expectation is, no, you can be 20, you can be 25, push it off, stay at your parents' house, don't take any responsibility. And it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. And I think you know what I'm talking about. And I want to show, hopefully, how that's seeped into the church, how that's seeped into our mindsets of how we do church, both individually and corporately. Let's go back to the passage that we read here in 2 Timothy chapter 3. Because Paul's writing here to Timothy, and he's using a lot of adjectives here. In fact, he's warning him that there will be some spiritually immature people that we will have to deal with. Now, as I read through some of these, kind of pinpoint, how do some of these words pop out to you as, oh yeah, that's adolescence there. That's the typical teenager or whatever, Not saying that teenagers here are like this, but the typical kind of teenage adolescent attitude is in there. He says, there will be people who will be lovers of self, lovers of money. Hey, Dad, when can I get my allowance? There'll be people who are boastful, arrogant, disobedient to parents. Is that hitting home? Ungrateful, unloving, irreconcilable. No, I'm going to hold my grudge. Brutal, haters of good, treacherous, conceited. Ever go on Facebook? Lovers of pleasure. We love to do fun things. There's a lot of adjectives that kind of are describing this idea of adolescence in this passage even. Now, these aren't teenagers that Paul's saying, watch out for teenagers. He's not saying that. But he's saying there are spiritually immature people that we got to watch out for. What I'd like to do is I'd like to give you 2 attitudes that I've witnessed that are prevalent attitudes in this whole idea of adolescence. And the 2 attitudes are this. The first is that there is an attitude of entertainment. And the second is that there's an attitude of ease. Ease and comfort. E-A-S-E. Ease. And those 2 attitudes, to be honest, are just attitudes that I've kind of noticed myself. I've been working with adolescent people and teenagers quite a bit. And I'm not saying that the specifics to people, but it's a general idea. It's a general trend. It's kind of the typical what's out there when you talk about adolescence. So when I look at the attitude of entertainment, let's talk about the attitude of entertainment first of all. When I look at some of the descriptive words that Paul uses here, like boastful and arrogant, unholy, malicious, gossips, brutal, and lovers of pleasure, I see that attitude of entertainment that he's kind of describing there. And that speaks to our generation of adolescents too. You don't have to go very far, and you don't have to look very long to see that there's an attitude of entertainment that is really prevalent among our young people. People just want to be entertained. They want to experience more fun things and go on more thrills, and ride their dirt bikes faster, or play more video games, or watch more movies. These things are happening. When you go to a movie theater, if you go to a movie theater, what's the average age of people that are at the movies? 18, 19? There might be a few older folks. I was trying to remember the last movie I went to, and I couldn't remember it. It was so long ago. But I don't go to movies that often. But I remember one time going to a movie and actually I went on my own. I guess it must have been that good of a movie. I went there on my own, and a whole pile of teenagers were just coming out of this theater that I was waiting to get into. And it was teenager after teenager after teenager. Teenagers go to the movies. Adults, once in a while, but not as much. We look at music. Who are the ones that are up to date on current music? Not me. It's the teenagers. It's the young people. They're the ones who are having the time to listen to music. Who's got time to listen to music anymore? It's not that easy, is it? Who are the ones that are up to date on current fashion and technology? You know, some of us are in that business of technology, so we've got those smartphones or whatever, and but it's the teenagers who know what's going on. They know what's out there. They know all the fresh stuff and what's popular, what's cool, what should be, the way we should look. Hey, Dad, you shouldn't dress that way. You look weird, No. I've worn the sweater since high school. It's still hip. Hip's not hip anymore, guys. So it's the adolescents that are the ultimate consumers in our culture, and our culture would love for it to stay that way. In fact, our marketers and advertising gurus would love for people to extend adolescence as long as possible, because the longer people stay in adolescence, the longer they continue to be consumers. Talk about the attitude of ease. There's this desire for an easy life, for comfort in life. Paul writes about some immature people here who say they're lovers of money, they're lovers of self, disobedient to parents, without self-control. These are people who don't want rules. These are people who want to do what they want to do, to express themselves and be themselves, but they're not people who want the rules. They want just an easy life. They want it handed it to them. But you know what? Don't forget to give me exactly what I want when I want it too. There's that right of entitlement as well. And so it's kind of a typical teenager thing. You think about a teenager, and I'm not picking on you guys. Please, no, I love you guys. I love you wholeheartedly. But a typical attitude of a teenager, or you picture a teenager on a Saturday. What's a teenager doing Saturday morning? Everybody just said sleeping. Okay, that's fairly accurate, I would say. But there's this whole, you're right. There's this whole idea of, I just want life to be easy, kind of rest on my morals and rest on my parents' wealth. They've got so much, and I don't need to go and work hard at it. I don't need to go out and find a job. I've got a place, and it's okay, Lethargic is the adjective. I searched high and low for an adjective to really succinctly define this. Lethargic is that adjective. Resting on the past success of their own, not even of their own, but their parents and grandparents even. And when you define lethargic, you use words like drowsy, bored, unusually tired, unenergetic, dull, indifferent, apathetic, and sluggish. I looked it up. Those are words that are in there, lethargic. And I think that word really pinpoints this attitude of ease in a spirit of adolescence. I've even talked to high school teachers and even some students as well who recognize the fact that this is happening, that there's this right of entitlement again, where a teacher would, let's say a student would write an essay. They wrote the essay, maybe it's the worst essay in the world, and the teacher marks it accordingly, D or C+, or whatever. And a student will get upset because the student will say, oh, I did the work. I put all the time into it. I did the project, right? It's on time. Where's my A? And that's beginning, if not already, really a part of this idea of attitude of ease. And it happens in the schools. And teachers are telling me, what do you do with that? We want to give them a good mark, but we can't because it's not good work. But let's give them a good mark anyways, because the parents are even on the student side. Hey, my son needs an A to get to his scholarship or whatever, right? My son should be given an A. He did all the work. But no, there's that right of entitlement that's kind of out there. The worst for me, and you may agree with me, hopefully, is that in this attitude of ease and in the spirit of adolescence, there's this whole idea of hanging out. Just hanging out. Hey, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm going to Billy's house. What are you going to do? Oh, just hang out. What do you mean hang out? What does hang out entail? What's involved in hanging out? Oh, we're just going to sit around. We're going to, I don't know, maybe watch some TV, watch some funny clips on YouTube, or, write some funny comments on Facebook, or, hanging out. I picture just like people just sitting on the couch, kind of gut hanging out of the shirt, chips on their shirt, and, arm on the couch and one sock hanging off, just hanging out. And that's what adolescents love to do. They just love to hang out. And in that spirit of ease. It's the idea of, I don't have to really go out and contribute. I'm still allowed to be consumers. I'm still allowed to sit here and kind of do what pleases me. There's that entertainment there, but also that consuming attitude too. I want a life of ease, and I want a life of entertainment. What really kills young people, and I say this out of love to our young people, what really kills young people is that this worldly thinking, that this extended period of adolescence is acceptable and natural and unavoidable. We think that this is the way it's supposed to be. We think that it's always been this way, that there's always been 15 years of adolescence, 15 years of mooching, of being consumers, of being entertained, of wanting an easy life. But that's not the case. There's many, many, many years of history where adolescence wasn't in existence. The whole teenage culture, like I expressed earlier, is a fairly new thing. Since the 1950s, really. A brief history over the last 100 years or so, you could look, like 100 years ago, people were working, and young people were on the farm. They were helping out their dads out in the fields, in the barn, or they're helping their mom in the house. They're doing those things, and they're contributing. And I see the Badlands chuckling over here. Good for you. Badlands are a prime example of not falling into adolescence. Good. And so they're out there. They're contributing, and that was the whole idea. Dad hadn't gone out to the shop or whatever. Dad hadn't gone off to work. Dad worked at home. The farmers worked at home, and there were some cities, of course, but that was the prevailing attitude. Was young people contributed to the home. They were responsible for home activities. They were responsible for farming activities. They were responsible for community activities. And then World War I comes around, and young men suddenly are forced into this adulthood where they're becoming soldiers. You have the Great Depression that comes soon after that. The Great Depression. People didn't have time. Young people didn't have time to hang out. They didn't have time to just, I'll do whatever I want and not be a contributing member of society. No. The Great Depression, I don't know if many of you even remember the Great Depression, but the Great Depression caused people to, we're trying to get not just food on our tables, we're trying to survive here. That's how bad it was in the States and in Canada when the stock market crashed. World War II, shortly after that, obviously, more soldiers, more fighting for what's right, fighting for what's good, fighting against the enemy. Where's that fighting now? What are we fighting against now? But after World War II is when that economic boom happened for us, right? That's when the United States, North America, Canada became more wealthy. That's when we became we attained more, we just grew more, we spread more, we attained more wealth, and our young people no longer needed to be contributing members of society. Our young people didn't have to go out and work. They could. They still had that choice, and maybe a lot of parents put that upon them, but they didn't have to. And so this whole idea, this whole teenage culture comes to play. Roller skates, root beer floats. I only know these things from Back to the Future movies, That's where I'm getting my information. That teenage culture starts to play there, right? And over the years, the adolescent age, the teenage culture is more focused on, more marketed to, more said, hey, consume, be more consumers. And you didn't have to be contributing members. And so we reach a time now, here we are, 50, 60 years later, where adolescence is loved by the world. They love adolescence because they want people to be consumers, not contributors. And it's not just the world, it's Satan and his demons as well. They want us to be consumers rather than contributors. So while there's that attitude of entertainment, there's that attitude of ease that's fairly prevalent in adolescence. How does that relate to Us, spiritually. Spiritual. What is spiritual adolescence? How do we connect the dots between normal adolescence and what's in the church? What's in us spiritually? How does that affect us spiritually? Because if we're all honest with ourselves, again, we lived during a time during adolescence, and we live now during a time where adolescence is loved. The culture loves adolescence. They would love for all of us to be consumers. They would love for all of us to be irresponsible. They would love for all of us to be a typical Homer Simpson kind of father figure, where he's just completely irresponsible. Don't worry. Oh, and I get the message at the end of the show. There's a good moral. Okay, everything's all right. How does that seep into the church? Well, it doesn't take much to see that the attitude of entertainment comes to play in a church, and it comes to play quite easily. You know, we talked about movies. I mean, here's just a basic, simple example. We talked about movies. And that you go to a movie theater and you get entertained, right? What's at the movie theaters? Big lights, big sound, big screen. And here we are in a room with big lights, big sound, and a big screen. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the big lights, big sound, big screen, but it's hey, let's be careful, let's be cautious. It's easy to slip into an attitude of entertainment here. It's easy to come and be a spectator. It's easy to think that this is performance. There's a whole dynamic there between true worship and performance. Used to be a day when the church was the leader in music. Used to be the day when the church was creating all this music and the world copied us. This is a long time ago. But now, it's us copying the music of the world, right? I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but I remember when, we didn't always have drums, we didn't always have guitars in church. And in fact, there was a lot of controversy in having rock and roll in our church services. Because people believed that rock and roll was a worldly form of music. A sinful way of music, even, some believed. And yet we've adopted that kind of music. We used to lead the world in music, but now we've adopted the world music. Add to that the idea of celebrities. Celebrities are prevalent even in our church, whether they're musical celebrities, music artists, even worship artists, or speakers as well. You bring in a speaker who could be a retired sports athlete. You could bring in Mike Pinball Clemens, for example, a retired Toronto Argonaut football player. He's a believer, and he does a lot of speaking elsewhere and in many places and travels around. We could bring him up here and we could have him talk. And you know what? If we brought him here, we'd probably get a pile more people coming in. And we'd probably get a lot more people who are like, oh, what's he got to say? Maybe he's got something more spiritually true than what we've heard before. Whatever, right? Because he's a celebrity. We love celebrities. And so it gets to a point where, man, we got to be careful that this idea of celebrities, that these celebrities are not the ones that we are more influenced by. Sure, I'm sure they've got good things to say. But it gets to the point where it's almost that a person who has studied 10 years in theological training and 30 years in pastoral experience has less influence than what a celebrity would if they both came up and talked. Because we love celebrities. We love to be entertained. That's worldly. Even it's kind of strange. I don't know if you find this strange, but I've kind of found this strange, where there are worship leaders who sell their songs that they write, and they become celebrities. But I'm sure they're godly people. I'm sure there are a lot of godly, Paul Balash, Brian Dirks. There's a ton of them, and they write good music. We sing their songs, and I understand they have this desire to have the church worship and to write fresh songs that are culturally relevant. That's church relevant for now. But we need to be careful. All I'm saying is we need to be careful not to worship celebrities, not to be entertained by celebrities. Oh, I can't sing this song because it's not written by this guy. Oh, but when I get Matt Redman's CD all the time because his stuff really speaks to me. And that's okay, but let's be careful that we're not being entertained by celebrities. Let's be careful that we're not falling into that worldly structure of, man, because he's a celebrity, because he's successful, we have to listen to him, where we should be more influenced by him. I found this even in Bible colleges and seminaries, where professors they're stressed. There's stress and pressure put on them to continually to research, to write papers, to be published, to write books, and the school puts that on them because they want their professors to be well known. They want their professors to be, good at their craft and smart and knowledgeable in a certain area of theology or whatever it may be that they're teaching, but they want their professors to be well known so that the professors kind of gain a reputation. And then because of that, the school gains a reputation. And because of the reputation, what happens? Why do you want a reputation? Well, you get a reputation so that you can bring in more people. You bring in more students. Your school becomes bigger. And your school is more popular. You seem successful. And so there's this whole idea, man, you know what? It's a fine line between, especially when you've reached that point, for some of these guys who are celebrities in speaking and in music, man, that's a fine line between performing and true worship. We need to be careful. I was going to say, sometimes we look at our bulletins, we say, oh, who's speaking today? Or what band's playing, you know? Oh, they don't really speak to me. I'll watch online. I don't know. Sometimes we do that. It's easy for worship to become about the performance. Now, the bottom line is that I'm not saying that these things are bad. I'm not saying that these things are sinful. But what I am saying is that first, having these things, having this attitude of entertainment, having even the structure, the form, the building, the way that we do things is tricky. That first, it's not necessarily helping some people's assumption that church is about entertaining me. And secondly, we walk on thin ice when it comes to seeing the difference between true worship and performance taking place in our congregations. So we need to be cautious. I say this out of love. I love the church. I love Maranatha. I love what we do and how we do it, and I think we do stuff well. I'm saying we need to be cautious. And it's not just our church. It's the church in North America. These are trends that are happening. We need to be cautious, and we need to be intentional. So what about the spirit of ease? What about this attitude of ease? Comfortable life. 2 weeks ago, actually, we showed a video on the persecuted church. 2 weeks ago was the day of prayer for the persecuted church. And so we showed this video where people in other countries are persecuted for their faith. And they suffer, physical pain and emotional torture because they believe in Jesus and they want to follow Jesus in other countries. This happens. And I remember coming up, and it was part of congregational prayer. I remember coming up and I said, how blessed we are to live in this country, right? And we prayed. And later that afternoon, I was having lunch at Valerie's house with Valerie and Sharon and Sarah and Dvorak, and we got to talking about the persecuted church. And wow, what a moving video that was. And Valerie said something that stuck with me. She said it's okay to quote her today because she's right. She usually is. And she said, you know what, Mike? Here's what I was thinking, is that they are the ones who are blessed. Those who are being persecuted are the ones who are blessed. And I was like, you're right. You look at Matthew 5, you look at what Jesus teaches in the Beatitudes. He says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the gentle. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and say falsely all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. I'm looking for blessed are the wealthy, and I'm not finding it. It's not there. Blessed are those who are being persecuted. It's a different way to look at life. It's a different way to look at a life of ease. We're so wealthy. We're so wealthy. Jesus said to the rich young ruler, remember I spoke on the rich young ruler 2 weeks ago, and he said how hard it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Jesus said that. This is Jesus teaching on what it means, on the difficulties of being wealthy. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the persecuted. Not saying that we're not blessed, but because sometimes we do feel blessed about being in a place where we can worship. And that is a blessing. But Jesus, it's hard for rich people to enter the kingdom of God. It can be so easy to rest on previous success in the church. It can be so easy to not fully acknowledge our spiritual needs because our physical needs are met. In fact, it's easy to come to church and hang out. It's easy to come to church and just hang out, isn't it? But church isn't about hanging out. You know, we talk about that spirit of ease among adolescents, just hanging out, sitting on the couches or whatever. You know, it's easy to come beforehand and just kind of hang out with people beforehand. It's easy to hang out in the lobby during worship, during the time when the church is together and worshiping God. It's easy to be out there during worship and just hang out. And it's easy to hang out over coffee afterwards. We got to be careful. We need to be cautious that we're not here just to hang out. We're the church. We're not adolescents. Back in the old days, like I know what I'm talking about, but back in the old days, if you look at old church buildings, some of the really, really old ones, I'm talking like the old Catholic buildings, Anglican Presbyterian buildings, they didn't really have lobbies. Their lobby was like the size of the sound booth, you know, it was 20 square feet. And you walked in and then you came into the sanctuary. It was that. You basically walked in the front doors to get warm, wipe your feet, and you walk into the sanctuary, this holy place. They didn't have lobbies back then. They wanted people to enter into a sacred place of worship. Let's make this a sacred place of worship. Yeah, we can worship in fellowship. That's our great word, in fellowship in the lobby. But let's be a community. Let's be the church. You know, let's be careful. We're not here to hang out. I hope I didn't just ruin your conversations over coffee. But a challenge. It's a challenge. You know, let's talk about stuff. Let's be real. Talk about what God's doing in our lives. While we're being honest here, you know, we talk about teenagers, even teenagers in our own congregation, and it's my job to talk with them and say, hey, what do you think about church? What can we do better? What do you think about Sunday mornings? What do you think about Wednesday nights at youth group? And when I get to Sunday morning services, you know, some teenagers say, you know what? I find it boring. I just find it boring. There's that lethargic attitude coming back in. It's not meeting my needs. It's not a thrill to me. It's boring. And so what do? Well, some teenagers will find a way to get out of it. Some will go help Sunday school with the kids. And we need to be careful. I think we just need to be careful. I don't want to take all these awesome teenage volunteers away from Virginia, but we need to be careful that we're not empowering, that we're not allowing this lethargic attitude to fester and to grow. You know what? You don't need to be a prophet to see where that attitude of ease leads, especially with young people. Because if they find church boring, if they come with an attitude of ease, that church should be easy, that community should be easy, and it's not, then what happens when they move out? Oh, they're going to move out, and then they're going to, I'm going to go check out church, and then, it's boring. I'm going to go do whatever I want because I'm old enough to go do whatever I want. So we got to be careful. Let's not allow that attitude to grow. Let's not be enablers of that attitude to grow. So it's so easy to fall into an attitude of ease. That's really where we slip. We always fall back into a life of comfort, right? But here, listen to what Paul writes to Timothy again. He says, I solemnly charge you in the presence of God and Jesus Christ. To what? To preach the word, to be ready in season and out of season, to reprove, to rebuke, to exhort with great patience and instruction. He says, but you be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of evangelist, fulfill your ministry. He says, endure hardship. How much hardship do we endure? Man, it's so easy to fall into that to that attitude of ease, because we do have so much wealth. I'm going to go home this afternoon, and what am I going to do? Watch football, sit on my couch? I don't know, but the top things on my list aren't endure hardship. No, it's not. It's go get comfortable, have a nap. Not that those things are bad, but we got to be careful. We got to be careful here. The ultimate kind of deception is that, there's no more battles to be fought. We're told, work out your salvation in fear and trembling. Work it out. You're saved, let's work it out. It's work. It's not ease. It's not comfort. We got to work it out. There are battles to fight, but you know what? We're so lulled to sleep sometimes that we don't recognize where these battles are. What battles are there to fight? What spiritual battles are there to fight? Sometimes it's hard to pinpoint it. Sometimes it's hard to, what am I supposed to be fighting for? So we've got all we want, but there's deception happening. We're being lulled to sleep. It's a crazy kind of battle where we're giving all the bullets to the enemy and we're just taking it. It's crazy. It's deceptive. There's that deception too. Okay, you know what? It's okay to live a life of ease. We said the sinner's prayer. You're going to go to heaven. Take it easy. Calm down. That's what Satan would love for us to do. Just say that prayer. Believe that we're going to heaven, and just live that life of ease. Not make disciples. Not go out there. But what's Jesus' command? His last command was go. Get out there. Make disciples. Not invite them in for coffee. He didn't say invite, make disciples. He said go, make disciples. There's a whole trend. There's a trend going on, even in the world today of, we like to just be comfortable in here. We like to have people be comfortable in here. You could be an atheist, and you could probably be comfortable here, or in any other church in North America, perhaps. We don't want to make that attitude of ease something that happens here. Let's be cautious. Let's be careful that we function as the church, that we fulfill our ministry, as Paul says. Let's not be a church of ease. Let's be cautious. Let's be careful. Let's be intentional. I think that what our real problem is that it's very simple to have a life of ease, to want that life of ease, and it's simple for us to do that. You can kind of sum up this attitude of ease in one of our sayings that we say, and it's this: we want our cake and we want to eat it too. We want the best of both worlds. We want the best of this world, and we have it, and we want the best of eternity, and we hope we're going to get it. And I think that if we honestly look deep into our hearts, all of us struggle to give up the comforts of this life to follow Jesus fully. And it doesn't take long to read the words of Jesus to see that that's exactly what we have to do. That's exactly what we must do. Deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him. So to conclude, I just want to say that these words I speak in love. These words I speak because I love the church. I want our church to do well. I want our church to succeed. I want our church to fulfill its mission. I want our church to not be a church of adolescent spirit. I want our church to be not a church that is defined by entertainment and ease. I love our church, and I think that there's so much we can do to continue to move forward in ministry. And I hope it's becoming more clear for us to see that it's so easy to fall into this idea of spiritual adolescence and having those attitudes of entertainment and ease. And actually, you know what? In some of my studies, this idea, this spiritual adolescence idea, was actually predicted by some godly men, not in the not-too-distant future, or the not-too-distant past, sorry. 150 years ago, Charles Spurgeon, he was a well-known speaker, well-known preacher, and author. Spurgeon wrote this, and I've used this quote before. He said, "A time will come when instead of shepherds feeding the sheep, the church will have clowns entertaining the goats." The band's not here to perform for you guys. I'm not here to be a clown and juggle balls up here. I'm here to bring God's word and hopefully spark something. Hopefully have the Spirit move and change us. The band's here to lead us into worship, to lead us into time to focus on God, not on self. A.W. Tozer also predicted this kind of thing. Even 50 years ago, he said, I see the time coming when all the holy men whose eyes have been opened by the Holy Spirit will desert worldly evangelicalism one by one. I would like to see the time when the men and women of God who are holy and separated and spiritually enlightened walk out of the evangelical church and form a group of their own. When they get off the sinking ship and let her go down in the waters of worldliness and form a new ark to ride out the storm. Wow. That's quite a statement, I think. And you know what? In the news, in recent years, there's a trend. There's a trend that's kind of happening. We look at Willow Creek Church, for example. Willow Creek Church is this massive church in the Chicago area. Bill Hybels, the senior pastor there, and they consider themselves for many, many years to be seeker-sensitive church. Do whatever it takes to kind of bring people into the church and make sure that they're comfortable, and we'll preach the word to them. But a few years ago, they realized, you know what? We're not doing it right, because they said they're not making disciples. They weren't making disciples. They realized this. They're not making disciples. They're bringing people in and teaching them the Word of God, okay, but at a very comfortable level, at a very entertaining kind of level. And sure, they had lots of people, but were they producing? Were they fulfilling their ministry? No, and they realized that, and they've turned. They've gone about facing that. Another example is more recently is a very well-known pastor, Francis Chan, who you may have heard of. He's pretty well-known from the San Francisco area. Has a very large church, very successful church, and I believe he's a man of God, and a lot of the stuff that I've heard him speak speaks to me. He speaks truth. He's a man of God. And he's, in an interview that I watched earlier, he said that, you know what, when he was leading this church, he thought, you know what, there's always something that's got to be changed. The church always has to change a little bit. There's a tweak here or there, so we tweak this church, and we tweak the church this way, and we tweak it this way. And there's always more tweaking to do. And more recently, he said, you know what? He said he's going to leave. He wants to leave that church, and I think he's in the process of doing that, if not already done. He's left that church. The church is healthy. The church is okay. They have solid leadership, and he's made sure that there's solid leadership there, and they will continue on. But his desire, you know what his desire is? His desire was to leave that church and start something new, to start with a group of people that would be willing to go from scratch, from square one, and do church the way that we actually believe it, the way that we've been taught, the biblical principles of church, and just see where that takes them. And I don't know much about where he's at now and where that is going, but there's a movement kind of going around where it's like, you know what? We're missing the mark sometimes. We're not right on all the time. And so that's happening. 3 things that we need. First of all, we need to get this right. If you're in the marriage ministry course this weekend, that's my perfect country speaking there. We need to get this right. We need to have the church function the way that God has designed it to function. The second thing we need to have humble hearts, to shed any attitude of spiritual adolescence and to grow in maturity. And third, we need God, because He alone is the one who can show us the truth. He alone is the one that can save us.
To the river, take us there in unity to sing a song of your salvation, to win this generation for our King, a song of your forgiveness, for it is with grace that river flows. Take us to the river in the city ears to hear the cry of heaven, for that cry is mercy. Mercy to the fallen sons of men. Mercy, it has triumphed over judgment by your blood. Take us to the throne room in the city of our God. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon us. This is the year of the Lord. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon us. This is the year of the Lord. Take us to the mountain. Lift us in the shadow of your hand. Is this your mighty angel who stands astride the ocean and the land? In his hand your mercy showers over dry and barren place. Take us to the mountain in the city of our God. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon us. This is the year of the Lord. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon us. This is the year of the Lord. Take us to the river. Take us there in unity to sing the song of your salvation, to win this generation for our King. Song of your forgiveness, for it is with grace that river flows. Take us to the river in the city of our